Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Montgomery, you've been nominated to run the FHA, and FHA provides taxpayer-backed mortgage insurance, helps millions of Americans buy homes they might not otherwise be able to afford. And unless it's managed well, though, of course, the FHA can expose taxpayers to risk of billions of dollars in losses. So it's a very important position here. You've run FHA before, and now you want to go back and do it again. And I want to pick up on Senator Brown's question about what you've been doing since then. Your bio says you served as commissioner of FHA from 2005 until mid-2009. What month did you leave?
If memory serves correct, I think I left on July 2nd, 2009.
Okay, I think
Friday.
Bloomberg thinks it's July 15th, 2009, but does that sound about right?
It was early July.
Okay.
It was not quite 6 months.
And what month did you officially start a new company called Collingwood Group?
It was about a month later.
About a month later. So 1 month after leaving FHA, you founded and became vice chairman of this new company. And according to the Bloomberg story, your company was, quote, known in the housing finance industry as a specialist in helping firms navigate FHA-related penalties and lawsuits. Now, Wells Fargo was a client of yours, is that right?
Yes, Wells Fargo was.
And in 2016, Wells Fargo paid $1.2 billion for defrauding FHA. And as part of the settlement, Wells Fargo admitted that it had, quote, certified to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, during the period from May 2001 through December 2008, that certain residential home mortgage loans were eligible for FHA insurance when in fact they were not, resulting in the government having to pay FHA insurance claims when some of those loans defaulted. Now, your company was known for helping firms navigate FHA penalties. Your company had Wells as a client. So did your company advise Wells in conjunction with the 2016 settlement with FHA?
So just that's a lot of questions, Senator. Just to back up for a second, the Collingwood Group existed before I joined the Collingwood Group. We just renamed the name of the company that it was.
So you don't call yourself a founder. Let me just get to the question, though. My time will run short. Did your company advise Wells in conjunction with the 2016 billion-dollar settlement with the FHA?
So our firm was involved in helping the law firm that was representing Wells Fargo. I personally was not involved.
So I just want to make sure I have this right. You were the head of the FHA when Wells Fargo submitted thousands of fraudulent mortgages to FHA and cost the government millions of dollars. And then soon after leaving FHA, you joined this company making money advising Wells Fargo on how to pay back the government as little as possible for defrauding the agency that you ran. Now, let me ask another one. Mr. Montgomery, was U.S. Bank also a client of yours?
So, by the way, there's about a 5-year gap in there between me leaving and us doing work for Wells Fargo.
I
wasn't involved in that case.
You didn't pick up Wells Fargo's client until 2016? Is that what you're trying to say?
And I'm just guessing it was about 5 years later, but again, I personally wasn't involved in that case.
But the period of time that settled is the period of time that involves when you were the head of the FHA.
I'd have to go back and read the settlement, but again, I wasn't involved in that settlement.
We know when you were the head of the FHA, and we know that the Wells Fargo settlement covers the period that you were the head of the FHA. So I'm asking if U.S. Bank was also a client of yours.
U.S. Bank was, but that had nothing to do with the False Claim Act.
Well, in I'm not asking about false claim, I'm asking about what happened while you were running the FHA program. Because in 2014, U.S. Bank paid $200 million for defrauding FHA. And in its settlement, it admitted, quote, from 2006 to 2011, it repeatedly certified for FHA insurance mortgage loans that did not meet HUD underwriting requirements. Did your company advise U.S. Bank in conjunction with this settlement?
I believe we helped look at loan files, as I mentioned to you yesterday. You know, the government asserts material weaknesses. A lot of what we did was look at loan files, which, you know, they have a right to defend themselves.
Well, they certainly do have a right to
determine,
defend themselves, and somebody built a business defending them to help them defend themselves. I'd just like to ask, I know I'm out of time, I'd like to ask you to provide the committee with a list of the clients that your company advised on FHA-related penalties and settlements during the time that you were heading up the FHA and the time that you were with this company. You know, I've seen some amazing cases of spinning through the revolving door, but this one really might take the cake. This is someone who has run an agency that puts taxpayer money on the line, and while there, evidently does not do enough to stop big banks from submitting fraudulent mortgages, costs the government millions and millions of dollars, then waltzes right out the door and makes money advising those same banks about how to pay back the government as little as possible for the frauds committed on his watch. And now we're talking about going back and doing it all over again. You know, Mr. Montgomery may have the best of intentions, but we can never expect the American people to trust Washington if this kind of revolving door continues. So I hope that we will reject this nomination.
I'd like to respond to that if I could.
Please do. It's the chairman's time. But if he responds, will I have time to respond?
I'm prepared to discuss this topic all day, Senator, if you'd like.
So
I just want to be very, very clear. The government asserts one thing in the False Claim Act cases, that there's X number of files that you know, claims were paid on. They extrapolate that number across the entire book of business, by the way. These clients and their law firms asked us to come in there and said, is what the government asserting correct? Again, they have a right to defend themselves and to respond. In many cases, the government wasn't wrong, and the government knew they weren't wrong. In one instance, the government said $400 million in damages. We went and did the loan file reviews, and guess what? It was more like $125 million. Sure, they paid $125 million settlement, but that's a long way from $400 million. Again, I just want to be clear. They have a right to say, government, you weren't correct in this instance. And they said, you're right. And that's why they paid a much smaller sum.
Senator Warren, you can have the last word, but please be brief.
I will be brief, because I think somehow we may be talking past each other.
I hope we're not.
My concern is that you were the head of the FHA. It was your responsibility to see to it that standards were set so that these banks did not file false claims. And then, as soon as you leave the FHA, you go to a business whose job it is to make sure that these banks who have broken the law pay as small a penalty as possible. And now you want to come back to the FHA and run it again. This is the classic revolving door. In fact, it's worse than the classic. It is the revolving door at its worst. And the American people cannot have confidence in our government so long as the revolving door is spinning like this, that people work in government and then go make a profit off the times they worked in government. This just isn't right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I just think we should do what's fair, and that's all we were trying to do, Senator.